Hi, today I'm going to be walking through a job that we did in the fall of 2021. This was supposed to be a pretty quick job to repair some of the rot you can see here in the siding of our cabin. And what we found as we pulled off some of the skirting was major rot issues into the structural beams. So a very simple siding repair job turned into a major restructuring job. And while we were at it, we also replaced some windows and were able to do it pretty inexpensively with DIY. So I wanted to walk through this to perhaps help other people who are interested in this kind of work. So first thing I want to point out is how this house is built, this cabin. So it's up on these, I'll call them piers. They're really not, they're just concrete blocks. This was built very inexpensively as a camp. So you can see that whoever built this just kind of threw these blocks down on the ground and then laid their beam on top of these concrete blocks. Now, a major issue with this is concrete is porous, so it will actually draw water up from the ground. So on a traditional house, if you're doing a foundation around the outside, what this calls for is a piece of foam that goes in between anything concrete and any wood material that's above it as a buffer to prevent that moisture from traveling up through the concrete. That wasn't done here. And I think where this is really interesting as I walk through this is you can really see the damage this can cause over the years. Just to give everybody a visual of what this should look like, I made a very quick SketchUp document here. So this is a 3D rendering of the beam. You can see it runs the entire length of the cabin up on these concrete pillars. And the stack up on this, if I zoom in here, this is all 2x8s. So there's a 2x8 here in the back. Then there's a piece of 1/2 inch ply. Then there's 2 additional 2x8s. So it's a 2x8, 1/2 inch ply, and 2 more 2x8s. So 3 2x8s with that additional 1/2 inch ply. And again, that's all layered up. What we found when we first took our siding off to begin looking at repair, these 2x4s were completely disintegrated. This 1/2 inch ply, which is pretty resistant to water, was also disintegrated. And a good portion, almost half of this back piece, was also gone, which means this was an imminent failure condition here. This whole thing could have collapsed on the weak point. And you can see here, this is actually after I've removed a lot of this rot. You can see, especially here, it's just pulped. It's just turned into dust. So we started removing material here. And this is a closer view. You can see how long these nails are. That's where the wood used to be out to the surface of these heads. And this is where all the wood is gone. And because there was no moisture barrier here, water just got wicked up through the concrete and worked its way into these over time and completely destroyed the wood. So again, this is the rot we originally went in to fix. This is what we found. This was a total surprise. And this is the aftermath of all of the junk that you could just pull your hand straight through. This is a zoomed out view of how we went in to approach this. Now, I had several friends who were, concerned and asked, oh my God, how are you going to do that? So the way that we did this was, you can see the 2 jacks here. Now, what you want to make sure that you don't do is use a traditional car jack here that might only have a 2-ton capacity. You can go in any store and find very inexpensive bottle jacks, more like this, that are capable of 12 and 15 tons, and they may only be $30 or $40. So we had these 2 on hand. This is what we used. This is a weaker jack. This is a much stronger jack. It was enough for our job. But if you don't have these on hand, definitely look at the capacities of the jacks and make sure that your jack points are in good places. I'll talk a little bit later about how we had to do the far end of the camp. In this case, there was just enough material left that I was able to piece in some new wood after I lifted this up, but I wasn't able to jack this up too high, and I actually had to notch it a bit to avoid overstressing the beam. Oops, sorry, jumped to the end there. Okay. So this is a close-up on what I was just discussing of where the concrete just is laid right directly on top of that wood. And you can almost see here there's a crown See how that rises up? That's where this is actually compressed as it's gotten wet and weak, and the weight of the house is pushed around this concrete block. So the first thing that I did was I had some extra window and door seal that you'd apply as a waterproof barrier when you're installing new windows. So I put that down here. This stuff is basically just asphalt adhesive. You could use other things here. You could definitely go get some foam. Anything that's going to be a solid water barrier. In my case, this is something I had on hand, so I used that as a barrier. Next piece is just layering in that 1/2 inch to bring the sandwich out to the correct width of where we needed it to be. This is our first 2x8 as we're piecing in. And this is the second long 2x8, and you can see down here, I did take about a 1/2 inch of slump out of here that the camp developed, but we couldn't get the last 1/4 of an inch out, so I did notch it, and I was perfectly fine with that. So here's where we are there. Then as we work down towards the far end, you can see here I was using a lot of deck screws, but I was also using liquid nails at each step, so you'll definitely want to use liquid nails as well as deck screws. And structural. So these are 4-inch, I believe these are Spax lag screws. So what we wanted to make sure to do is tie together all of the stack up, because those deck screws are only 3.5 or 4 inches, so they're not getting all the way through. The liquid nails is going to tie it together and make it a beam, but you definitely want to sink some of these lag screws anywhere that you can in order to tie the whole thing together and make sure that it's strong. So once we finished that, we had about 15 to 16 feet repaired of this beam that we had found, and felt much better about this, that this was all repaired, this was strong, this was something we didn't know was there underneath just basic rot on the siding. Now the problem was what happened to the other 16 feet on the front half. And of course, as we got in underneath our front porch, we saw the same exact thing, that we had a bunch of rot. It wasn't as bad because this was more protected, but there were places towards the end that were also exposed. You can see here, I've done the same window and door seal wrap here to make sure that in the future, water can't come up through this concrete and get into these beams, and particularly the new ones we're putting in, which are treated, but you don't want to rely on just that because it will go out over time. And you can see here how we did have a lot of rot down in this area, and even some that got up into the rim joist over here, just above the sill. So I ended up taking out some of the rim joist and repairing that as well, about 2 feet. But we worked our way down underneath here, same technique. The problem was at this end. You can see this is a pretty large notch, larger than I would like. However, this was after we took out about 3/4 of an inch of sag at this corner. And the real problem working here is the joists run in this direction, just like this, underneath. And there was no structure extending in this direction to kind of jack up from this area over here where the mouse is. So what I actually had to do is just sandwich a 2x8 on where it was, sag down quite a bit on this corner again because the wood had just completely disintegrated and the weight squished it down. And then as we had new material, then I was able to jack it up and take out a little bit more of the slump on this corner. I ended up hammering this in with a sledge just to get a tight fit, but this was as much as I was able to take out. Again, this isn't perfect, but this is much, much better than where it was, and it took out a lot of the issue that we were seeing. And you can see here, this was the original job, was just to cut out the area of siding that was compromised. I'll go more into this in the window job. But on this side, really, this is all we had initially intended to do, was just to replace the bottom portion of siding. And then that gets here. I did want to show this, even though it's ugly. This rim joist was dry rotted. So unlike the rest that had actually gotten moisture and dampness in there, this was dry rot. It was very soft and powdery. So what I did is just take out a lot of the stuff that had gone and just used a quick coat of automotive primer on this just to kind of hold everything together. It's going to be covered anyway behind the decorative moldings and siding we put on the bottom, but I wanted to make sure that we at least gave a quick coat to that. And then this is new Texture 111 along the bottom here, which again sees a lot of weather and wind. And then this is the primed portion here, and then I'll get more into this as I go into the window job. So let me switch over to that. And this is the siding work that we did. So again, this kind of thing here is all we had originally intended to take off. So I nailed a board in as a straight edge once we leveled it up, made our cut, started looking at what we had underneath, and what we had wasn't real pretty. You can see over here underneath this corner of the window, we have a tremendous amount of rot here. And that's pretty normal when you have window leaks, right? A lot of the pros will always show you these corners are where they tend to happen, the bottom corners. This is where a lot of the moisture comes in. And when it gets behind the window, what it does is it runs right down your studs and just absolutely rots everything that's underneath that corner. And that's exactly what happened in this case from this bad window. This is after I picked out a lot of the bad sill, but the sill had just completely rotted in this area. We also found ants. I won't zoom in to avoid grossing everybody out, but there's a large number of carpenter ants that had gotten in here because of the moist, damp environment. They really liked the spot. So we went in there, got all of these out of there, made sure that they were dead, sprayed some killer in here to kind of impregnate the wood and make sure that they wouldn't come back once we did the repairs. Here's a piece of the new on, Texture 111. Now, I'm going to say right here, the pros will hate this. The correct way to do this is to use a piece of Z-flashing, aluminum, that comes in between this edge and wraps down the front face. And what that does is it gives you that moisture barrier so that moisture can't ever collect in this crack and rot the wood. We didn't do that for two reasons. It wasn't cost, actually, because Z-flashing is very inexpensive. One reason was my mom just really didn't like the look. She was the critic here, and she said, you know, I do not want the look of that. We've already got a belly band that's going on around. I don't want additional flashing calling attention to it. Number two, it's pretty likely we're going to cover this with vinyl siding or fiber cement or some other siding product in the future. So for right now, just to repair the Texture 111, this stuff, we just wanted to make sure that this is sound and we're not letting anything in the house. So that's one reason this repair is able to be pretty inexpensive. We're just going to caulk this gap, paint it, it's going to blend as best we can, and we won't have an additional flashing piece that's pointing out. Okay, now zooming in on the window here, you can really get a feel for the damage. I am just going to pull in here so you can see this whole stud, a large portion of the bottom 2x4 here is just all rotted out. And then all the way down from the window, this whole piece was just destroyed. So we obviously are going to have to do repair work here. And it was at this point we started piecing in new insulation, and we really said, gosh, it's even if we replace all of the surround on this window and replace the sill, it's going to be really difficult to stop this from happening again. And we started to go look at new windows at this point. But for now, we proceeded with the job, closed it up, made sure that everything was tight because we did have rainstorms coming. And when we went to the other window, we saw a lot of the same sorts of issues. So you can see here, same issue. This corner was leaking. This has a lot of damage. This has damage here all the way down into the sill plate. So both of these windows had been leaking for some time. So as we got into this, this was our rough opening. We just decided to pull the windows and say, you know what, let's see what we can do. Went to the store. We had no expectations for being able to find reasonably priced windows because it was post-COVID. Windows were hard to come by. Everything was extremely expensive anyway. And this being a seasonal cabin, we didn't have a real interest in installing high dollar cost windows. This isn't even heated. We don't go down there in the winter. It's just a summer cabin. So my parents kind of had an idea that we should try to hit a $50 figure, which I told them was almost impossible. Guess what? We got $55 windows. And not only are these brand new double insulated, beautiful new construction windows with integrated flanges, they're also 5.5 feet tall, 66-inch tall windows. So we were absolutely flabbergasted that this was the case. We talked to the window guy. He said they actually had about 23 of these in stock, but that Lowe's was discontinuing the line. And we probably could have bought more of these and just sold them on Craigslist for double what we paid. But these ended up being great windows, and I'll show some more of them later. So we were very happy with this. So we bought the two. And what that meant was extra work for us. Didn't mind at all. And in this case, it actually helped us because the rot extended so far past the windows. Cutting out another 2 feet was actually helpful. So you can see here as we started to cut down, we framed in new. We had to move the electrical down, re-insulate, close it in with Texture 111. And then we still have this damaged portion, and I'll show how we fix that in the next slide here. Really just cut that out. We did smooth face up here because a lot of this will be covered by the window lip, and then we put trim on the outside of that as well. So you'll see the finished product at the end. Again, anytime you do a window, this is kind of new practice. It's good to have. You want to create that waterproof barrier along your sill. Not only do you want to make sure your sill is slightly sloped out, in case any water does get in, it runs out of the house but not in. You also want to make sure that you have this adhesive asphalt tape on both the bottom that wraps up the sides and also on the corners, because as you could see before, when you do have damage, it's these corners that tend to bear the brunt of those leaks. Here's a shot from the inside with the window installed. Again, these were actually surprisingly nice Pella Thermostar windows, 5.5 feet tall. They let a lot more natural light in. Here's the energy performance ratings. This was all just kind of gravy for us. I mean, we had no real need for this in a seasonal camp, but on those really hot days when we have to air condition, this will help, and we were very happy to get these. Here's a shot of the window installed. Again, just rough installation on the one side, priming it in. This is the other side, the before. Now again, this is the first one where we had encountered damage. So this is how small the window was inside, and for reference, this is about a 3 foot by 3 foot window, so very standard 36 by 36 inch size. And then this is how much larger the new window is compared to the old one. You can see how much at the bottom is getting taken out in these two photos. There's the window opening framed in, and you can see here we actually added a completely new 2x4 here to have a nice firm edge to nail into when we're mounting the window, along with the base to the window, because this one was very rotted out. Here's the opening. Again, just piecing in that Texture 111 around the edges to make sure we had a nice clean opening hole. In this case, I pre-primed it before I mounted the window just to make sure we had a nice surface. And here's the window mounted. Here it is from the inside before we did the interior finishing. Now, the next step here, I'm going to show how we trim the window. I wouldn't recommend you do it my way. This is the easy thing to use. This is PVC Drip Cap. You can see this is 12 feet of it. It's inexpensive. It's rot proof. It's mold proof. Bugs can't injure this. This is the stuff almost anyone should use. However, this is the reason I did not. The overhang for this is just 1 5/8 inches. And the problem with windows that are mounted to Texture 111, which is all over the internet when you do searches for how to flash to Texture 111, it's very difficult. It's got all those grooves. It's really meant to be underneath an existing siding material. So when you're using it as a finished material like you would in a shed, every time you mount the windows, you've got these these grooves in it, and the window doesn't have that, it's not set back in behind the siding, that extra 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch. So when this mates to the Texture 111, this doesn't actually sit out far enough at this drip edge to give a lot of protection to the window. You've lost that 3/4 of an inch that you really need in order to have this protect the window. So I looked for this in a deeper finish, like 2.5 or 3 inches, and I couldn't find it, at least anywhere around here. I don't know if they even make it. So what I did is actually fabricated my own. So I just took a 2x4. This would be easier with a table saw. I used a circular saw and mounted it vertically and just cut a bevel in order to make these sloped. And I'll zoom in here on the corners so you can get an idea of what that looks like. So you can see how this portion is higher, then this has a slope down at the top, then the flat, and then as you could see back in here, I cut a drip edge all along there so that as the water runs down and over the front, it can't wick back along the front and hit the window. It'll drip, hit that little piece, and then fall off. So that's how I did these, which was very inexpensive, but very labor intensive. So if you can at all avoid that, I wouldn't recommend it. I would just recommend buying this PVC. In retrospect, I probably should have just done that. The windows are fairly protected themselves, so it probably would have been fine. And then here's another picture of how we are going to finish this up and get to the end of trimming this out. This is just regular wood trim. Again, you can use PVC. PVC is tremendously expensive. So in our case, with paint and priming, these will probably outlast the rest of the siding on the house for sure. But we decided to just go with wood because at the time we did this, the prices for the PVC trim were outrageous. It actually would have cost more than one of our windows because the windows were such a good deal. Here it is with the trim painted. Each side, and again caulked. So you've got this top piece providing most of the protection for the window here. All of these grooves back here had to get caulked in, and then you caulk in the entire top surface. Then anything underneath here, this caulking on the edges here, is really just to protect the trim from getting any water sitting on top of it. Your window behind this is completely protected because you've got that integrated flange that's silicone directly to the house. Here's another shot of the inside. The only reason I included this is just to show the spray foam around the edges. And again, anytime you install a new window or door like this, this is really going to help seal up noise, cold, heat, all of that. You want to use the blue can, which is the low expansion foam. Here's the outside again, and then final shot here as it was color matched as best we could. You can see there's a bit of a line. You can definitely see where it is. However, we were pretty pleased with how this came out. The bottom portion here where this board is, this is really just, we had some extra and pieced that in for extra protection on the bottom. This is going to get another skirt that goes all the way around the bottom piece from this edge of the siding down past the concrete block. But this fixed all of our rot problems. We got 2 entirely new windows out of it that are gorgeous and let in a lot more natural light and are way more energy efficient. We repaired this beam, which honestly was a little scary when we saw the level of damage. And between the cost of the 2x8s, the cost of the trim boards, the cost of the $50 each windows, this entire project really only cost us maybe $300 with some paint that we had laying around to do the rest of this work. Very inexpensive fix, very labor intensive. The beam in particular was a bit dangerous. You definitely need to be careful when you're working, careful setting the jacks, just careful in general having another person there while we're working. But we were quite pleased with how this came out. And for a DIY job down at a seasonal camp, the windows were much better quality than we expected to get. So overall, we were pretty happy with this fix. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions on the structure, the windows themselves, which probably aren't on sale anymore, or any other questions about the job, let me know. But I hope this was enjoyable to watch, and thank you.